everybody. Welcome to another episode of Besides the Revolution. Jack, good to be back together again. We did this. We kind of held our promise. We've actually got back to this a little faster than last time. So good to see you.
I don't know if it's quite a week, but it's near enough.
Yeah, it's close enough, right? Much closer than the last time we said it was going to be a week. So this is good.
Yeah. Busy times. But there's also a lot of pressing stuff we got to talk about. So we kind of can't not do this, really. A lot has happened even since we last spoke.
For sure. Yeah, I think, I would love the chance to sort of talk a little bit about what happened over the last 12 or 14 days with the war thing and just sort of my disillusionment with it for sure, being a very skeptical American who has watched our country march war after war into kind of misadventures. And you have a pretty good take on this, I think. It's distinctly, you see it differently. My skepticism overwhelmed me over the last couple of weeks. So I'd love to kind of hear your take on what you thought of it, and sort of, you kind of predicted the whole thing was going to happen the way that it did. So I'd be curious as to how you saw it and why you saw it that way.
Yeah, if I was a competent tweeter, I said this on Twitter the other day, but if I was competent at social media, I'd be out there bragging and arguing with people nonstop and about how I effectively predicted exactly how this would unfold. But what I will say, and the reason why I'm not braggadocious about this, is because I felt like it was fairly obvious. So let me just say what I was saying to people and what I was reporting at National Security Journal on this. Yeah. So when Trump was considering the B-2 strikes on Iran, there was a lot of discussion about, are we walking or sleepwalking into World War III? Are we just doing the bidding of Israel for no good reason? Are we dragging ourselves into a war? And are we going to put US boots on the ground in Iran? And the whole time I was saying this is not going to be a war on the ground for multiple reasons. One, you don't really need to do that these days. We see what's happening in Ukraine with the use of drone warfare. That's how wars are fought now. So if this had escalated further than was planned, I don't really think there was a high chance, actually, that we were going to see boots on the ground, regardless. But really, the main point is that there was never really, at least in my eyes, a foreseeable scenario where that would even be necessary. Because the strikes on Iran, the reason they were successful is that Iran simply isn't capable of properly defending itself. I did a report on the state of its air force and also the state of the air defense systems around Fordo and Natanz, its nuclear facilities. And not only is its air force ancient, we're talking about planes from the 1960s and 70s from the United States and various other aircraft from China and Soviet Russia. But its defense systems, its missile defense systems that intercept missiles coming in, were kind of like a hodgepodge of different systems that didn't really talk to each other very well. And we know that based on intelligence that came from a leaked video from a long time ago that showed the operational environment of the people who were manning those defense systems. And you could see that the systems didn't work well with one another. That's intelligence we've had for some time. So my point here is that Iran can't really properly defend itself. The only way it could have responded in a way that escalated into a war or hurt the United States would have required probably some intervention from one of its allies. And it doesn't really have allies. China wasn't interested in helping. Russia ruled out helping. There was just nowhere for Russia to go, for Iran to go. And that's why we saw in the wake of the strikes, Iran hit back with its own strikes, but it was really just symbolic. They hit back with 14 missiles. Every missile was intercepted. I think one stray was allowed to land somewhere because it wasn't going to harm anyone. And they gave the United States and Qatar a heads up before they fired it. It was completely symbolic. And so what happened is the strikes took out the nuclear facilities. Mission accomplished, according to the Trump administration, although we can go into that too, because it's not as simple as that. Iran hit back, is now claiming domestically that they've won, which is shocking and crazy. But also, they're trying to fend off this possibility of regime change, which was never going to be US-led. The Trump administration always said they weren't interested in facilitating regime change, at least through their own military power. And now we're in this situation where Iran is weaker. It doesn't have a nuclear or uranium enrichment operation anymore. And it looks like it was a success for the Trump administration. And that's where we are. There's more I can tell you on this, but I would love to hear your thoughts on it, because I know that you looked at this in a far more pessimistic way than I did. And I will just end this by
being
saying,
generous, I think.
right. But I just want to end this by saying I'm not a warmonger. I'm not John Bolton. I feel like I've got John Lennon and John Bolton on one on each shoulder and whispering into my ears throughout these conflicts. But, I wasn't pleased to see it happen, but I must say I'm pleased with the results so far, I think.
Yeah. My skepticism just runs really deep. The Gulf War, which is 1990, is like when I was in high school, right? So we've been in this world, and really prior to that, all of the stuff. I think going back historically to realizing that we're funding Iraq to fight the Iran-Iraq war. You could talk about the sort of intervention situations with the Shah and some of those things. And I think that's really the beginning of the American empire starts in that coup in 1953. And I think, that's really the emboldening move of the CIA and all the things that happens that go way back. And so my skepticism around Iran is really just much more about that, which is that, if you look at some of the context of, Journal for the paper on the New American Century or whatever it was called. It's escaping me at the moment, where there's these 7 objectives that we have in the Middle East, which is this Project for a New American Century. That's what it is. Yeah. Wesley Clark's kind of conversation around all of that, and just saying, sort of marching, and really listening to Kennedy during the campaign. His take on this too was very much that this was just kind of this endless sense that we just want to go back to war and back to war and back to war and back to war. And that has, my skepticism's off the charts when it relates to the Middle East. I've got 4 teenage sons, so I also have a lot of vested personal interest in this to see it not happen. I don't want to see it escalate. I certainly wouldn't want to see it escalate into a place in which my children are conscripted by government force into doing something like this. And, so I sort of played out a worst case scenario, which ultimately I probably have history on my side in terms of the worst case scenario, which is that America gets involved in these things and it just goes on and on and on. We never leave. We never go anywhere. We never just do the thing and go on. And I think that was part of what was motivating my frustration in it. I think the other piece of that was like, we drop the bomb and immediately you hear things about, well, is regime change really that bad? And it had a lot of echoes of the past. That to me is why I just resisted it. I don't really care one way or the other about what happens within those countries in terms of how they choose to resolve their frustrations. Clearly, Israel is a lone sort of person, or entity in that region. They have a different religion. They're constantly, being sort of pushed up against in terms of its the frustrations they have with Gaza and the sort of 2-state solution. I think there's a lot of frustrations by Netanyahu in particular with that. He's not interested in that. And I think just fundamentally going all the way back to it, if Netanyahu signs any sort of peace deal, his people will kill him. And if anybody from the Palestinian world signs a peace deal, their people will kill them. There's just a real troublesome animosity there. So I understand Israel's troubles with it. I understand their willingness to sort of go at it and say, look, with this is, we have the intelligence. It's time to go. We need to get this done. I get it. I understand all of it. My dilemma with it was America's endless sort of policing and position of saying, like, we have to always be involved in these things. I don't want that. And I feel like I know that could come across to a lot of people as like, if you're not totally in alignment with Israel, you're not, you can be accused of being an anti-Semite. I've been accused of being a Nazi, a lot of things over the last week or two of my sort of resistance from this, sort of being involved in it. And I'm not that. I don't want that. I just see a lot of troubles in our own country. I've seen us expend trillions and trillions of dollars and lives and fortunes and just sort of wasted energy on the Middle East. And I'm just tired of it. I don't want to do it anymore. And I don't think it's America's job to do it. am I happy with the outcome? Yeah. I mean, I didn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And if this is truly what's happened, and that this is really, I still reserve the right to be skeptical about whether or not we actually accomplished what we have. I've seen mission accomplished banners before. So, so I have my skepticisms about all of it. But if this is what has happened, and we truly did get that, and this is it, this is the end of it, and we're done with it, and really seeing President Trump kind of get into his frustration and drop the F-bomb the other day about how they don't know what they're doing and they continue to fight with each other. That exasperation actually was kind of hopeful to me, and sense of like, yeah, this is really troublesome. And if you really are that frustrated with it, the answer is not to go in and try to continue to do more to try to meddle around with it. I think he's got a good group of people around him that don't want that. So, if this is where we end, I'm happy with the outcome. I don't, just my skepticism ran really thick, Jack.
I don't blame you. I mean, it's clear that trust in the United States government's ability to effectively intervene overseas, or to constrain itself, and to perhaps only get involved in issues that are truly within the interests of the United States, or get involved to an extent that is beneficial to the United States. That people don't have the trust in the US government that they can effectively do that. And I don't blame them. Iraq and Afghanistan are good enough reasons for people to go, maybe this isn't wise. Look how that ended. Which is why I think Trump went into this. I do believe that Trump is a man who wants peace. I don't think this is a man who wants war. Yeah. And for all his faults, I think that that's true. And I believed him from the beginning when he said that he doesn't want a war. But he was really put up against it. That there were a lot of reasons why he had to do this. And really, it all comes down to the fact, I think, that this was frankly inevitable. It was always going to reach a point where something needed to be done, because Iran was never interested, really, in negotiations, in doing anything other than moving forward with its nuclear program. Once they develop a nuclear weapon, they're effectively untouchable, and that's what they want. And it's especially important, I think, to look at this from that perspective, because right now they're a weak country militarily. The only real threat I think we face now is terrorism, sleeper cells being activated in the United States. And so people might say, well, then was it worth going in with these B-2 bombers and destroying those facilities, and maybe ensuring that those sleeper cells are in fact activated, as Tehran has actually said could well happen. And so I think that's probably on the cards now. I wouldn't be surprised if something happened in the United States. But that being said, if a country is willing to do something like that, is that a country that you want to have nuclear weapons? It's a very, very difficult situation. Now, with regards to whether it was a success or not, yes, there has been a lot of flag waving about total annihilation, total obliteration. There's been a lot of pushback against that report that came out in CNN, citing, I think it was 7 people familiar with an early US intelligence assessment that said that the program was only set back by several months. And this is all very interesting. And I've been looking at the intelligence that's available, like open source publicly, and what has been said so far. And it sounds to me like they did achieve what they wanted. Israel's assessments are based on spies, are based on other intelligence that they've received, intercepting communications from with Iran. And Israel says they're very confident that the damage was done. The facilities no longer exist. And there was an interesting interview that J.D. Vance did, and he was on air with Bret Baier on Fox News the moment that Trump announced the ceasefire. And Vance was very prepared for it because he obviously knew that it was coming. But what I found interesting throughout that interview is that Vance didn't really want to commit to saying that the enriched uranium had been destroyed, which is now a big point of contention. And what Vance kept saying is, I believe that it's buried under rubble. He didn't expand on whether that belief was fact or what that belief was based on, and whether it was based on intelligence he had at the time. Although now it seems to suggest that actually intelligence does suggest that the uranium was not removed and it is buried. But Vance kept saying, the point here is that even if they have it, they can't enrich it any further. But at the same time, Iran, I forget his name now, Eslami, one of the nuclear chiefs in Iran, has confirmed that they are already assessing the damage and already making plans to rebuild their nuclear program. So what was interesting about this ceasefire is that nobody announced any conditions. Trump didn't mention any conditions whatsoever. It was really just a forced ceasefire that only came about because, like I said earlier, Iran cannot defend itself. And it doesn't want to get completely obliterated. It doesn't want to risk the United States sending in its military. It doesn't want to risk foreign intervention that facilitates a regime change. Khomeini probably doesn't want to be shot in the head or hanged like Saddam Hussein. That's all this was about. No conditions for that ceasefire were confirmed. And so that leaves us with a problem. Yes, the facilities appear to have been destroyed. Iran is probably lying that they think they can get this operational anytime soon, because Iran is also saying that they won, that there was a victory over the United States, which is clearly nonsense. But the intent is there, so they've not changed their mind. They still want to plow ahead with their nuclear plans. I think their best hope of getting nuclear weapons anytime soon is procuring them from elsewhere, which I don't think will happen. And it's just a very interesting situation. But it seems like Trump is doing all of this and being so heavy-handed and so active with regards to Iran and Israel, because I think he's working towards sort of rebuilding global diplomatic relations. And we've seen that because of reports that came out, I believe, yesterday, that Trump and Netanyahu have agreed to end the war in Gaza within 2 weeks, and use that as leverage to expand the Abraham Accords and create this big Middle East diplomatic reset. And I think all of this ties in with each other. I think Trump has a real big plan here. And if he can pull it off, great. But there's one sticking point, and that is, if the war in Gaza is to end, and if Trump's dreams here are to be realized, it requires reform within the Palestinian Authority. And Hamas would have to lose control over the Gaza Strip, and it will be handed over to, forgive me, I forget the two countries that were named in the reports, but the authority will be handed over to 2 other countries instead. So a lot could happen in the next few weeks, but Trump has a plan here. I'm not a trust the plan kind of guy, but I think Trump knew what he was doing all along, if I'm honest with you. And I'm someone who at one point said that it feels like Trump is sort of Mr. Beaning himself.
Yep. There's a great line from the article, from the news the other day or whatever it was. It was Mr. Beaning his way through it. Yes.
That's how it feels sometimes. But, when the way things have panned out now, I'm starting to think, I think there was method to the madness.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if this is really the plan and this is what he's really trying to do, I think something has to be done in terms of world, just a conversation around world peace and organization. I think that's a real thing. I think that particular region of the world, the engine that the entire globe runs on, is supplied underneath their ground. And that has caused tremendous conflict over and over and over again. And I think it's another conversation that needs to happen in relationship to the American empire. And, a lot of these troubles started because of just this sort of empire to empire to empire situation in which one empire surrenders its sovereignty to another empire. And what the end of the British Empire really sort of feels like is this surrendering to the U.S. empire during the Suez Crisis. And a lot of the things that happened around there, you get the Shaw stuff that happened in 1953 with the nationalization of oil. I just don't think that can be dismissed in the conversation. And I think that's one of the things that probably drives my skepticism towards, can Trump get this done? Somebody's got to acknowledge that dependency that the rest of the world feels upon that region for the economic engine that drives the whole boat. I mean, if we can talk about other people having oil and different reserves and those kinds of things, that place is the cheapest place to get oil. It's the most prolific amount of oil in anywhere in the world. And so drives so many of these conversations and the conflicts that are there. I do think one of the pieces that I found sort of interesting in this entire deal, and one of the reasons that I think I probably had my skepticism up again, was that the old AM radio gang started out again into their world, the Mark Levins and the Sean Hannity's, and it was like it was almost like they went to the shelf and pulled out the old tapes from 2002 and replayed them, and all the guys just had grayer beards. And grayer hair from when they were doing the same shtick in '02. And so I think that's partially what I think is really important. And I wrote a piece yesterday about kind of the atmosphere of the new media and some of the dilemmas that people face within it when they want to speak out, when they want to say something. Those guys are propagandists, and there's no doubt in my mind that that's really what this comes down to. You look at what happened in '02 and the number of people, for every 300 people that were on the news that at that portion, there was like 2 guys that were anti-war, and they were barely anti-war. You started to see some of those same things again. No dissent, no conversation, can't have the discussion. And I don't like that. And I don't think that that's healthy for us. That was a bothersome thing to me in this, is that you couldn't touch the subject. I don't like that. I think that's troublesome, that you can't criticize someone about what their choices are. And especially when it relates to war, especially when it relates to geopolitics, we should have a robust debate about it. And I think that's really important. And when all things are off subject, simply because it touches on a topic that's troublesome historically, I think you can't dismiss what happened to the Jewish people historically. And so, but to be able to say that, look, an Israeli government and the Israeli people are 2 distinctly different things. The Israel of the Bible and the Israel of today are 2 different things. They're not the same thing. And it's okay to have a conversation about what Benjamin Netanyahu has in relationship to how he runs his government. That's an okay thing to have a debate about, but that seemed to be off topic, and I don't know, or you couldn't touch it as a topic. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because I certainly experienced my own sort of backlash in that, which, it is what it is. I'm not apologizing for what I said or what I felt about it, but I'm curious as to why that's such a taboo deal that we can't talk about.
So obviously people, even Jewish people within Israel, are critical of Netanyahu because they don't all vote for him. So, of course, there's no reason why people cannot be critical. I think the problem here, it's twofold, and I hope I remember my second point as I go through my first one. So the problem here is twofold. With regards to what happened in terms of the process leading up to the B-2 strikes, if you were not fully plugged in to what's happening, and most people aren't, because this is, the only reason I'm so plugged into this is because I'm paid to do it. I can put the pieces together and you can kind of see what's happening. But for everyone else, it's really just a matter of faith. It's, are the politicians doing the right thing here? U.S. politicians, Israeli politicians, and you look at recent history, historically recent history, and think, well, maybe actually they're probably not. If you have all the information, if you spend the time assessing what's going on and can draw conclusions based on data points and things that have happened, then you could really foresee what just happened with the B-2 strikes, because I foresaw it. And, I've not been doing this for decades, but I knew what was going to happen, and it happened. So it's very hard for people to place their faith in Israeli politicians, US politicians. That's one part of the problem.
Sure.
The other part of it is that the anti-Israel message, for a long time, it's been standard Democrat thinking, for some time now, at least the last 10 years, maybe longer, to be generally critical of Israel. And that criticism goes much further than criticism and often becomes quite nasty. And it does become anti-Semitic. There are very large sort of circles within the Democratic world, or Democrat world, that are without question anti-Semitic. And so they use Israel as a way of, how do I word this? They use Israel as a sort of a battering ram. It's kind of like a scapegoat, I suppose. It's, if Israel ever steps a foot wrong, well, that's the reason why they're so right in the worldview, that the Jews are the source of all the world's problems. You know what I'm saying? And
Yep.
that dynamic exists on the right too. And in fact, actually, I think it's growing on the right, because for a long time, the anti-Israel, or I should be more specific, anti-Semitic section of the right was really confined to these sort of aging neo-Nazis. In the UK, it's the aging neo-Nazis from the 1980s, National Front and stuff like that. And in the United States, it's the remnants of whatever the KKK became and these kind of fringe groups. But I think anti-Semitism actually has become far more commonplace on the right now. And so that makes it especially difficult for people to determine whether criticism of Israel, of what's going on in Iran, is coming from that place of Jew hate, which is real, or if it's coming from, as I was saying in my first point, this just total lack of faith people have in our governments to do the right thing and to make wise decisions and to not drag us into endless and needless bloody wars.
And that's certainly where my sentiment came from. I mean, I just am so skeptical of all governments. I just think all governments don't do things well. I mean, we don't see that. They don't have a track record. Just historically, governments don't have a track record of being honest or doing good things. And so when something like this comes up, it just becomes that my skepticism just goes right to it. And especially when I saw the old sirens coming out, the Mark Levins and the Sean Hannitys, and those old sirens of like the past are just, it's a very visceral reaction to me, because I was a giant advocate of the Iraq war. I mean, I really was. I mean, I spoke to all the people that I could talk to that this was something that we really needed to do. Lost friendships over it. I mean, it was a really dumb moment, actually, just a youthful sort of rah American patriotism, ignorance to large measure. That was the moment I was in. And so to hear those old folks come back out and start to say it again, I just felt all those kind of internal reactions once again. And then I have my own children on the line. My biases are real. I mean, it just feels like my children's future is on the line in relationship to that. And especially when you're talking about nuclear war and what could have put the potentials of the worst case scenarios that could have happened in those situations. And you're right. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. You had a much better read on it because of what you're doing, because you're the time that you're spending on it, which I appreciate very much, because it's there's realism in that I have no context to say that the Iranian Air Force is bad or doesn't have the equipment to do what it needs to do. You see the stuff on Twitter or whatever else of launching missiles, and you think, well, here we go. We're right back into this mess again. And that's where my whole sort of dissent came from, was this just lack of trust. I just do not trust governments. I don't trust them at all. I don't trust them as far as I could throw them. And in the case of the United States, you couldn't throw it at all. It's just such a behemoth. It's so large. It operates on its own. I felt that whole sort of reaction happening within me, which is, here we go. Like, no matter who you elect, you're always sucked back into it. I mean, it's a great Tom Woods line, which I really do love, which is, no matter who you elect, you always get John McCain. And it's kind of real. I mean, that's at least the experience that Americans have. And as somebody who's sort of paid attention to politics over the last 25 years, that's a real thing. I mean, you just really do notice it. You really notice that, like, gosh, we're always back in these same things. Do I think that Israel's influence in the United States and its politics is more significant than it might otherwise be if they were someone else? Yeah, I do. I mean, I think there's clearly an affinity for Israel, and I understand why. I mean, I definitely understand its position in the region. I understand, like, our dependency upon cheap oil to make an economy function depends upon having an ally there in that region, like Israel. Totally understand all of those things. My frustration with it was much more related to my skepticism of government. I don't trust Benjamin Netanyahu, and I frankly don't trust our own government to do anything right. So no matter who's running it.
But there were two big things that gave me a little more faith in Trump when he was doing this, because I didn't really think for a moment that this was ever going to become, at least in the near term, a boots on the ground war. Two reasons. One, Trump campaigned on no new wars. And yes, he's a man who can go back on his promises, but something like that is pretty spectacular. He's been saying it since 2016. He was very proud that there were no new wars in his first term, although there were some strikes against Syria. But, there were no new wars, and he was very proud of that. And then he spent 4 years out of office talking about how there needs to be no more wars. And then now he's right back in office. The idea of him having to say, hey, guys, I'm really sorry, but new war's coming. I just didn't see that happening.
Yeah.
I don't see how he could have done that. But also, there's the question of the 2026 midterm elections. Going to war would not have helped them. There are instances throughout history where wars have, benefited leaders, but I don't think a war like this would have benefited the Republicans at all, and Trump wouldn't want that. But also, actually, there's a third point, and that's Trump's legacy. And Trump is very clearly interested in establishing a legacy that is better than it is now. And he's got a good chance to do that in his second term. There are Democrats already softening to him. He has a real opportunity now with the expansion of the Abraham Accords to do something quite spectacular. And so I think that's what he was interested in all along, and that's what led my sort of faith in what they were doing. What's interesting, with regards to your point about Israel and its position on the world stage and its influence in the United States and all the hostility that's come with that, I think what Trump is now trying to do could perhaps finally put an end to all that. If it is indeed possible to end this war in Gaza, to get the reforms with the Palestinian Authority, which is a tall order, and I'll be really, really surprised if this happens, but we're yet to know actually the specific details of that plan. We only have leaks so far. It could well be that progress has been made with this. Right. And so if they are able to establish normal diplomatic relations between Israel and the Arab states that do not currently recognize it officially, if the war in Gaza can come to an end, if they can finally figure out a way for the two-state solution to work, which Israel have said, according to these leaks, absolutely they're interested in this. Although Israel said that many times before, by the way, it's always rejected by the Palestinians. I couldn't tell you. I forget the number, but it's happened many times before.
It's many times, yeah.
But if Trump can pull this off, my hope is that not only does it end the military conflict, not only does it stabilize that region of the world, but we might finally see an end to all this bitter feuding about Israel here in the United States. And one knock-on effect of that I think is particularly good is it will finally separate the wheat from the chaff. It's going to separate the people who were criticizing Israel or the Israeli government and their specific policy decisions and the rabid Jew haters who were just using that as fuel. So there's a lot of good that I think can come from this. But that being said, this could all go wrong. Who knows? You never know that one of these rogue states may well want to just give Iran a nuclear weapon, and that changes things completely. I just don't see that happening, at least while Trump is president. So what I will say is progress really needs to be made in the next few years before Trump leaves office, because whoever comes next, if they're really soft, if they're really predictable, then who knows what kind of stunt Iran may pull. And then we're just drawn back into ongoing negotiations where Iran never abides by the agreements that it makes anyway. So it's who knows?
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I like I said, I'm skeptically pleased that we sit where we sit today, as of the 27th of June, and everything that's happened. So I think you could see a lot of positives coming from it. I'm probably with you, Jack. I mean, I think Trump's talked a lot about not going to war. I think his speech in Dubai or Yemen, wherever they gave him the plane, I can't remember where that was, but his speech is one of the best speeches probably of his entire two versions of the presidency. And it's very much sort of an attack upon the America policing the world situation. And I think that's really positive. I think that's a conversation that is good. And I think that's partially why I wanted to have the conversation about like the war itself. Like this is this kind of fixed point in which we've been here before, seen this movie. It's very frustrating. It's kind of, and I don't disagree with the people who are saying, why are we, we step over the homeless people on our way to go vote for more money to go overseas. I get that. I understand that frustration, and I feel that very much as an American, and I have watched our country sort of evaporate the opportunities for my children to have a future, buy a house, do the things that are out there, simply because this is just how we've done things. We just always are just more money, more things. We're the solution to all the problems in the world. I don't want to do that any longer. And I agree with you. I think this will allow us to have maybe a more honest conversation about the things that actually are the troublemakers, right? That, like, the government side of things. It's better for us to have those conversations about what is our role, both as an American government, the Israeli government. What shall we do in our situation like this? And if he pulls it off, and he's famous for, his rabid supporters all say he's the best 5D chess player there is. So if this is what's going on and this is how he does it, then this is good. I mean, it will turn into be a good thing. War is always going to be I'll have a very visceral reaction to it. And I'll speak out against it. I don't want it. I don't want anything to do with it. And the closer you get to it, the harder it is to pull back from it. And that has been demonstrated in history time and time again. And so, the odds are not on the side of what actually happened in this particular event. The odds in history are that it gets to be much worse than where we are. And so let's hope and pray that this is where we stay.
Yeah, it's like I say, there's a lot could change between now and in the next few years. But I saw some news this morning that I thought was interesting as well, which is amid all this and immediately after Trump and Netanyahu's plans were revealed in leaks with regards to the Abraham Accords expansion and the possible resolution of the war in Gaza. Putin said today that he's willing to engage in a new round of negotiations with Ukraine. And that struck me as interesting because, Russia's been historically hesitant about negotiations for quite some time now. They've engaged in them, but every time they come to the table, they say, listen, we want everything and we're not budging. This is really as simple as that. The only concessions they're willing to make are perhaps concessions on the escalation, the escalated demands that they had. So, for example, they'd be willing to go back to their initial demands, which is, listen, we want the Donbass, we want these territories that we believe are Russian, and we'll leave it at that. Whereas Dmitry Medvedev is saying, we want to take over the entirety of Ukraine, we might bomb London, all this crazy stuff. These are the escalating things the things that have escalated over the years that Russia, the concessions Russia will make are those. And is it fair to Ukraine? No, but that's probably what's going to have to happen. Russia is going to get the upper hand in the negotiations, period. Sure. That is what's going to happen because Russia will not lose this war, period. All the data shows that Russia is winning this war by every metric. They can fund it for perhaps another 2 years, even as they're on the brink of recession, unless there's a massive collapse in oil prices. So we'll see how that goes. But Putin saying that he's willing to come to the table, it could suggest a few things. It could suggest that Russia believes now they have the upper hand, that the retaliations to Ukraine's spiderweb drone strikes has been sufficient, that they've punished them back. They now look like the stronger force, and they can go in and say, how about we do that deal now? That might be what's happening. It could be also, and maybe this is a stretch, but I'm not sure it is. Putin knows what's going on with Trump. He knows what's going on with Iran. He offered to facilitate negotiations between the US, Israel, and Iran. And Trump told him, listen, I don't need help with Iran. I need help with you, which I thought was funny. But Putin making this announcement immediately after it's revealed that Trump is looking to reset diplomatic relations in the Middle East and the war in Gaza, it could set this trend towards global peace, which is really interesting. And if we see that trend happening, I mean, it's really in the interest of every major power in the world to get on board with this. And does Russia want to be the pariah forever? Well, they have BRICS. They are forming new geopolitical and economic alliances at the moment. But it is much better for Russia to have normalized diplomatic relations, much in the same way that we're going to see happen in the Middle East. And I wonder, again, might be reaching, whether that's where Putin is. Maybe he's at the point where he's thinking, there's a taste for peace right now. Maybe we can ride that sort of bandwagon, and maybe we'll also get most, if not all, of what we want in the process. And that's that. And Trump will jump at that. Ukraine will not jump at it, but they'll probably end up accepting it, I think. So
I don't think they'll have
it's
a
just
choice.
spectacular.
Yeah, I don't think they'll have a choice. And I wouldn't dismiss Putin's distrust of Xi either. I don't think that's as sexy a relationship as everybody sort of makes it out to be. I think there's a lot of skepticism and distrust. And look, I've said this a long time. The heart of the Russian Empire has always been about trying to be associated and acclimated to Europe.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly Moscow and St. Petersburg, these cities are European. They look and feel and act and participate as European cities. What's left of all of the Eurasia stuff, it's sort of all through the Urals and all the way into Siberia, yes, certainly has some closer proximity to China, but I don't think that it's in Putin's interest to sort of cozy up with Xi. I think he's doing it for lots of reasons. I think there's lots of diplomatic reasons in which that's happening, but I think if Putin can make a deal, I think if Putin can make a deal and he can be associated and brought somewhat reluctantly into the fold of Western Europe, that's what he would, I think, appreciate and probably strive for. So I think it's a good time for all of it. And if Trump's pulled this all off, then put him on Mount Rushmore.
I mean, if he pulls this off, it's pretty spectacular, and I think a lot of people have to forgive him for a lot of things, including myself.
Same. My last 2 weeks have been pretty frustrated with him, so I'll have some mea culpas to do. So,
but I think you're right. I would just quickly say, I think you're right though about the China-Russia thing, because yes, they're close economically, diplomatically. But China is always engaging in cyber espionage against Russia. Right now, China is engaging in cyber warfare, well, not warfare, espionage against Russia, because they are tracking the performance of Russian military hardware against Western hardware. And they're through back doors getting this information to see just how well Russia is actually performing, because it helps China see how well US and Western machines are performing in Ukraine. And that's particularly important for China because they may well have the biggest military in the world in terms of manpower and soldiers, but they're not battle tested. They're not used to going into battle. So they really, frankly, we don't know how well they will perform. And China's trying to do that by hacking Russia. So yeah, that relationship is not perfect. I do think Russia would like, ideally, a better relationship with the West. But at the same time, Russia doesn't help itself. Putin doesn't help himself. He's been poisoning people in the United Kingdom and all sorts of terrible stuff.
And so there's too many dynamics there that they can't ever just let themselves be European. I totally understand that. But I do think there's something to that I think it's a time that there's going to be a realignment of a lot of things. And I think if Trump pulls this off, that realignment will be really, really healthy for the world. So, hey, great stuff today. I really appreciate taking the time to do it and talk. I think it's good to have rational conversations and kind of air some things out. I've needed to do it. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. I really do appreciate your sort of ability to see into the behind the curtain, because I think that's something that really is exacerbated in social media and on X and everything else. It's just this kind of like wild jumps to conclusions when nobody really knows what's happening. And the libertarians are the worst at it. So I'll own that as part of my inability to sort of, you take a lot of things and make predictions based upon the past. That's a good notion of the libertarians. But in some cases, if you don't know all the details, it can lead you to bad conclusions. And I think in my case, I was irrational in my approach to it, other than I have a visceral reaction to war. I don't like it and I don't want to see it. And I think our world will be better off if we don't have it. So my hope is that that's what's the path we're on with Trump. And it seems like we might be.
Yeah, I don't be too hard on yourself. I don't think you were irrational, and you could well be proven right. Yet we don't know what's about to happen. Who knows? But we both have our strengths. This is something I'm good at. You're better at many more things. than I am too. So I think this is always an interesting conversation with you, Aaron. And maybe next week we'll be coming back and talking about how I was wrong and how we're now engaged in a boots on the ground operation in Iran.
Well, let's hope.
Who knows?
Let's hope not, and let's hope we can talk about other things besides the Middle East in the future. So
yeah,
good deal. Have a good one.
You too, mate. Bye bye.